Well, welcome to another installment of the Martial Arts Yoga Philosophy Podcast. Today I want to start talking about yoga and its relationship to cultures of abstinence, what's sometimes referred to as the ascetic lifestyle. If you are familiar with depictions of yoga in pop culture, you have probably seen the yogi represented in kind of one of two ways. One is as a kind of pseudo spiritual white person adopting a kind of culturally appropriative vibe, talking about their chakra, their karma, their this, their that, as they go to their yoga classes with their yoga mats and their yoga pants or man buns or whatever, right? And that's kind of that's a whole scene. We don't have to get into that right now. But the other one, the one that I actually want to focus on a little bit today, is the yogi who is depicted as someone separated from the rest of society, withdrawn from others, maybe alone on a mountaintop somewhere or secluded in a monastery. And the core question is this: does a real yoga practice require some kind of withdrawal from society, from relationships, or, as the case may be, from sexual expression? Now, in some previous episode, I talked a little bit about the yogic conception of the self, and without rehashing that too much, here's a Spark Notes refresher. In yoga, the self exists on kind of a sliding scale. You could say at one end is the completely fragmented, obscured, or disintegrated self, the self that is completely misidentified. And on the other end of the sliding scale is the unified, fully integrated, cosmic self, a self that is, in a sense, one with all possible selves. And from that framework, that idea of the self, yoga attempts to offer guidance to its practitioners on how to move the slider from the fragmented and obscured self to the unified cosmic self. Okay, you still with me? If all of that makes no sense, then I don't go back an episode or two where I try to unpack this strange concept of the self as understood in yoga. But that's the idea, right? Guidance on how to realize or actualize the highest version of the self. And for many, throughout the long, long history of yoga, this has meant to them rejecting behaviors or habits or institutions that are seen as obstacles to one's spiritual development. And at the top of that list is often sexual relationships. Perhaps you've had a friend who lives a, single, carefree lifestyle, and God bless them for it. Maybe that's you. and someone will chastise them or will chastise you for being a little promiscuous, and what's the rejoinder you often hear? Hey, I'm not a monk. I didn't take a vow of celibacy here, right? I'm just trying to have a good time. So what is this relationship between being a monk or having some sort of spiritual project in mind and withdrawing from or rejecting sexual relationships? Well, interestingly, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the foundation to yoga philosophy, doesn't talk about sexuality in explicit terms. Instead, there is this reference to broader ethical principles, among which is one that is called brahmacharya. And brahmacharya is the ethical principle that is most often associated with the idea of celibacy. But if you unpack this term and translate it, what it's directing you to do is not, hey, don't have sex. It's directing you to live in alignment with Brahman, the higher or the true self. So you kind of still have to do the work, right, of explaining what the hell celibacy has to do with the higher or true self. And this is the part where I think a lot of people who are very online are going to start to wonder, is yoga like the original NoFap? And the answer is kind of, sort of, yeah. But let's try to hear out the perspective as best as we can before we maybe see what kinds of rebuttals or refutations of that have been presented, both from outside the community of yogis and from within the community of yogis. And to do that, I want to consider the context of the modern world for a moment, especially for young men navigating a hyper digital, hyper sexualized environment. I don't think this is a particularly controversial observation, that even if you're not actively seeking out sexual content online, and if you are, no shade, okay? We're not judging here. Just saying that even if you are not somebody who is actively seeking out sexual content online, the algorithm probably is seeking you out. From explicit material to the constant stream of suggestive images on social media, it's everywhere and it's hard to avoid. If you were to go on to TikTok or YouTube or Instagram and you're not using content filters of any kind and you just start looking for yoga content, the likelihood that what is going to trickle to the top of the surface of that content is going to be, if not overtly sexual in nature, then highly sexually suggestive. It's pretty high. It's a pretty high likelihood of that. That's what's getting pushed by the algorithms. So for many, this becomes a source of real frustration. Not necessarily because of some moral guilt that you feel from seeing these images, although maybe some of you do feel a little shame when you are scrolling through them, okay? That's we can unpack that maybe on another day. So it's not because of some moral guilt, but because of the constant stimulation disrupting what you are otherwise hoping to accomplish. You're trying to work or focus or find something specific, and suddenly, boom, your brain is hijacked by the chemicals that it starts pumping when it is presented with, big booty Instagram models, hypothetically. And this is a feeling that is something akin to being pulled by like a magnet or something away from whatever it was your brain was doing before it saw those images. Now, that magnet could be real weak. That magnet could be real strong. It might be close to you. It might be far away. You might have the strength to resist its pull until it's removed. You might not. And this is where I think we can begin to draw a connection between yoga, celibacy, and what modern internet culture calls NoFap. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what this term means, like, congratulations, you've avoided at least some internet brain rot. But if you're already nodding along, then yeah, like, this is where it's all starting to overlap, right? NoFap is a contemporary movement aimed at men promoting sexual abstinence or self-restraint as a means to improve one's discipline, energy, confidence, and just like overall sense of well-being. In that sense, right, it's not entirely dissimilar from the interpretations of yogic restraint that are presented in the Sutras of Patanjali and in other yoga texts. Is it good or bad? Well, as I was saying in the description of the modern context, I don't think it's particularly controversial to point out that our sexuality can feel disruptive. Sometimes we don't want the feelings we're feeling, but they arrive anyway, pulling us off track. In yogic terms, these are fluctuations of the mind, right? Vrittis, as they are referred to in the sutras. Disturbances that pull us from a state of clear presence or self-awareness. Now, are these disruptions really inherent, and are these disruptions inherently bad? Or is it a result of cultural conditioning that makes us feel ashamed of normal, healthy human desires? There's many other experiences that we have that are disruptive. Hunger, fatigue, pain. So why single out sexuality, right? Well, actually, there are ascetics who would try to deny food too, because basically they said, yeah, you're right. Hunger is a disruptive thing. If I can eliminate the sensation of hunger or reject feeling somehow disrupted by it, then I am further along on my spiritual path. Well, at the point where you're trying to not eat, not sleep, not feel anything, in the hopes that that somehow makes you one with the universe, a reasonable question you might ask is, what is the goddamn point? If you have to deny your very humanity in order to achieve some sort of transcendent state, like, is it worth it? I can't be the judge of that for you. I have my own thoughts and feelings, which hopefully are coming across. at the moment. And people have pointed out that many experiences can be disruptive, but trying to deny them becomes its own obsession. Yes, it's all fine and dandy to understand these feelings, to scrutinize them, to see if we can be more disciplined in how we behave, notwithstanding those feelings. But to be trying to deny oneself becomes a kind of disruption in and of itself. That by constantly thinking about what you're avoiding, you still end up thinking about it all the time. You're still trapped, just on the other side of the mirror, so to speak. And so I think this points us maybe to a healthier middle ground or a deeper insight, which is that it's not necessarily about eliminating a behavior or desire, but to relate to it consciously. To ask, are you acting from intentionality or from compulsion? Because the Yoga Sutras don't say, never touch yourself. They don't say, don't fap. What they say is act in accordance with your higher self. Now, if you're rubbing one out for the third time today because you're bored or lonely, chances are that's not your highest self in action, right? But I don't think we should pretend like it's easy to find the right balance either. And unfortunately, a lot of content aimed at men today, whether it's under the NoFap banner explicitly or some kind of adjacent manosphere culture, seems to exploit this struggle rather than help men navigate it meaningfully. There's another buzzword, manosphere. Maybe you're familiar with it, maybe you're not. If you're not, okay, what is the manosphere? Depending on who you ask, it's either a helpful media ecosystem for men or a reactionary, regressive space that essentializes maleness in narrow, stereotypical ways. My opinion is that it's a mixed bag. The term manosphere is used by many pejoratively to describe a set of conservative or traditional male archetypes, often reinforcing heteronormativity and dominance-based masculinity, while others would say it's just about centering male issues and male problems in your discussion with the goal of finding modern solutions to modern problems. Critics argue that it pretends to speak for all men while really targeting a specific subset of men. Whether you find value in it or not, the manosphere and yoga have this in common, which is that, at least historically, they both emerged in male-dominated spaces with a variety of prescriptive views on self-discipline, including as it relates to one's sexual behaviors and sexuality. Are these practices helping men? Are they making men more intentional? Or are they just shaming them into obsessive control and self-denial? For me personally, the best versions of these traditions say, yeah, you can have sexual impulses, because guess what? They're going to be there anyway. But you don't have to be ruled by them. They don't have to be pulling you around on some leash, like an addiction, like something beyond your control. And that's where yoga tries to offer something different, right? It doesn't demand repression. It demands awareness. It says, choose what to do with your desires. Choose it mindfully. Maybe set aside for yourself the time that you're going to allow yourself to consume sexual content, whatever that may be, whether it's softcore or hardcore or whatever. Give yourself that time. But when it's not that time, set yourself to the discipline of self-restraint. Set yourself to the practice of denying those impulses. As my sense is, if you try to white knuckle your way through abstinence with no real integration or understanding, then those repressed urges may show up later in far worse ways. I mean, it's a common stereotype. Maybe this is like the third version of the pop culture depiction of the yogi I should have mentioned, although it's kind of, I would say, maybe a subcategory of the phony that I described as the first type. We've all seen the public downfalls of men who practiced extreme virtue while secretly collapsing under the weight of their own denial. Telling their students or followers on the one hand to live these virtuous, disciplined lives, and in private being womanizers, being abusers, being riddled with all kinds of impulsive behaviors. If it didn't work for them, what makes you think it's going to work for you? So that's the middle ground, right? The enlightened centrist bullshit that we seem to arrive at the end of each of these episodes. Maybe the goal isn't endless indulgence or strict denial. Maybe it's simply about becoming the kind of person who chooses rather than reacts. If that's what we mean by living in alignment with the higher self, then maybe yoga is the original NoFap, but only if we understand that restraint is a means, not an end. Anyway, I think that's all for today. Thanks for listening. In the meantime, stay safe, stay alive. Namaste.